So you've been touring a lot with the book lately.
Uh, it's kind of, the place is kind of a mess. It's,
Well, I've been reading all about that and the Lit Fest and so on. I'm observing from my side, but it seems to me the landscape is changing. Would you say?
I cannot hear you. Kind of, there's an echo.
Okay, I'll say again, and we'll sort this out. I was asking that from the outside here, there's all these lit fests and books and book tours, and it seems like the landscape in India is changing. Yeah, what would you say to that as someone who's right there and who can tell us something about that?
Well, we are actually trying to imitate the left lit fest ecosystem. Okay, and because the right now the government is Modi government is in power, and a lot of people are ready to come, and a lot of people are ready to help. We are able to put up certain lit fest. When we look at the left lit fest or the lit fest of the old established media and the present scenarios, I find that we have light years to go to create a real vibrant ecosystem.
Okay.
So that is it. In fact, we have to actually divide it into two things. One is that moving with the society and creating an intellectual ecosystem. In terms of working with the society, in terms of going into the society and creating the awareness, we have done excellent work. Okay. And we are seeing the result of it. Whereas in the case of creating the narrative, the intellectual ecosystem, etc., the left has invested in it, and it still has a stranglehold on that. So now we have to change that, and it has to be done in a very organic way, not by imitating them.
Well, that's a big job, and parts of India are still enmeshed in the Aryan invasion theory. That's how much work we have yet to do. That the basic historical footing that's, that people should be inhabiting is not out there just yet. But we have a lot of work being done, as you've said. And to my mind, you're one of the main people driving this and have been for years. Your output is, to me, just amazing. So I wanted to really, know more about you to begin with, and then to understand where some of these ideas are coming from that you're bringing out. So my first question to you is, at what point in your life did your self-awareness include being a Hindu? When did that become part of your self-awareness?
Well, you should know about the place where I live for this. If you take the map of India and you put your hand in the southernmost part of the mainland, Kanyakumari, that is where I live. And here you have like 45% Christian population. And it would be going like 47, 48, 49, sometimes 51, sometimes 49. It will be moving there. But the point is, this has been a battleground for the harvesting of souls for the last 200 years. Okay. And the evangelical forces have been launching a full-scale crusade on Hindus, and Hindus have been resisting. So at a very early age, you become very clearly aware of all these things happening around you. For example, I studied in a Catholic school, My primary school, I studied in a Catholic school. My middle school and secondary school also I studied in a Catholic school, because that is how the environment is in our district. And I attended this primary school where there used to be this hello, is this frozen? The screen
Yes,
is
I can
frozen?
hear you.
You can hear me. Okay, that is fine. So now the point is, I remember this particular drama when I was studying at the time, second standard or third standard. Okay, there was this school drama where this god statue was there, and the statue would talk. So it would ask people to bring a lot of gifts. People would be bringing a lot of gifts, and at last Saint Savior would come and he would drag the wife of the priest from behind the goddess statue and would show these pagans how they have been worshipping a false goddess and how they are being cheated by this priestcraft. This kind of attacks, okay, this kind of vicious attacks you could always see, and it was taken for granted that if you are a Hindu, you should be subjected to this kind of attacks, okay, and so we became aware of the whole thing at a very early stage, that we are Hindus and we are fighting a battle here. And then communal riots happened in 1982 in a place called Mandekadi, a goddess temple. Communal riots happened, and for the first time, Hindus retaliated. And Hindus retaliated for the first time. Hindus retaliated, and the Hindu retaliation came with the help of the RSS. And after that, what I saw was a tremendous change in the entire collective psychology of my district. Hindus got their respect. Once Hindus were united and Hindus were strong, the real positive communal harmony happened between Hindus and Christians. Christians started respecting Hindus. Christians became aware of not using offensive words against Hindus. Of course, the fringe elements do that still, but on the whole, the communal harmony had actually become better with the Hindus organizing themselves. So this was a very clear lesson for me, that if India is to have communal harmony, then Hindus have to be well organized. Hindu society has to be healthy and vibrant and strong. So that is how this awareness came.
Very early on, and because of the situation on the ground, which has its political origins, especially to people outside of India, how would you describe the political origins of that situation right inside India? How does that come about that this level of abuse is normalized? What is that rooted in?
Well, see, I always tell this. When you go to your primary school, the first history lesson you learn about India is about, after Harappan civilization, then you have this Vedic civilization, okay, Indus Valley civilization. Then you have this Vedic so-called Aryan civilization. And if you go through the textbooks, and I have multiple textbooks, if you go through those textbooks of 70s, 80s, probably 60s, I don't know, you will find that Hinduism is always shown as a kind of a religion filled with superstitions, karma theory, caste system. That is what they talked about. We never learned the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads in our history textbooks. But then you go to the third chapter, you will find about a chapter on Buddha, and then a chapter on Mahavira, then a chapter on Buddha. And you will have lofty ethical moral values of Buddha, teachings of Buddha and Mahavira put there. There will always be a question. What were the teachings of Buddha? What were the teachings of Mahavira? 5 marks question, part B, you will have. Okay. Whereas you won't have what are the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads. You will have what were the beliefs of the Aryans. Those were the questions. The questions are formed like that. And then you will study about Ashoka. This is where the answer to your question comes. And you learn about Ashoka. The first thing you learn is that Ashoka got converted from Hinduism to Buddhism. Maybe factually wrong, but the thing is, this is how every teacher teaches you. When you are a child of 5 to 10 years old, you are taught again and again and again that Ashoka got converted from Hinduism to Buddhism, from this violent Hinduism to this pacifist, morally elevating Buddhism. So the child is told early on that getting converted from Hinduism is a moral act. It is an act of ethical superiority. So this normalizes all kind of attacks on Hindus. And after that, whenever you study Bhakti, you study everything, it is all reform movements. You see, Hinduism is basically deficient. You always needed the reform movement, and still Hinduism has not become perfect. It is still deficient. So you need a Jesus. You need a morally superior Abrahamic religion coming inside. So that whole is created by the system. And once that is created, all other activities are normalized. All proselytizing activities are normalized.
Now, how does that get placed in society through the education system, certainly, but how did the education system come to be molded like that? What were the motivations of the political powers? That were they themselves primarily of a Christian orientation somehow, or was it a matter of trying to write a history of India which doesn't light fires anywhere? What were the motivations to produce such a break on the potential of Hindus valuing their own civilization?
I think in a way, the Nehruvian, see, three streams you can take in Indian historiography. One is the colonial historiography, the interlogical, the colonial historiography. Another one is the Nehruvian historiography. And another one is the Marxist historiography. Over the period of time, the Nehruvian historiography absorbed inside it the colonial historiography. And then the Nehruvian historiography that has absorbed the colonial axioms, it then morphed itself into hardcore Marxist historiography. So in the case of Nehruvian historiography, you will appreciate the aesthetics of Indian religion somehow. You will appreciate Adi Shankara as a great philosopher because the West has appreciated him. You will appreciate Upanishads because the West has appreciated. You will always see the Indian culture through the prism of the West, and you will appreciate whatever the West has appreciated, and you will just depreciate whatever the West has told that is nonsense. Okay. And then comes the Marxist historiography that says that there is no value in Indian culture at all. It's all because of this production relationships, and everything that you see are superstructures that are built over this production relations, the dialectical materialism, historical materialism, and after that you have the class war. You have to see the whole thing in this way. So if there is something very beautiful, then it is actually the opiate created by the feudal classes, or now the feudal bourgeois classes that are emerging in India. The point is, this historiography that the Marxists are creating, it is actually now, it is now having a stranglehold on the entire Indian historiography. The motivation is, because coming back to the question of motivation, Marxism, the Marxist historians who have invested so much, and you cannot take them lightly, they were not fools. They very seriously invested a lot of efforts. You take, for example, Ram Sharan Sharma, R.S. Sharma. He was a great Sanskrit scholar. He studied all the literature. Rahul Samgridhyayan was a Sanskrit scholar, a Pali scholar. D.D. Gosambi was a great Sanskrit scholar. They all studied our scriptures, they studied our Dharma Shastras, everything very thoroughly, but they were fitting everything into the framework. Their aim is to tell that there is nothing of value in Indian culture, and if there is anything of value in Indian culture, it is a movement towards Marxism. If you want to appreciate Adi Shankara at all, you have to think of Advaita as a kind of communism without party membership. Then only you can appreciate. Otherwise, it is an opiate. So this kind of historiography was getting created on one side. This historiography does not touch Christianity or Islam because Marxism believes monotheism is a positive development over polytheism. They are very clear about it. So whatever happened in India, whatever humiliation that has happened, whatever human tragedy that has happened, all this is actually in support of human progress. It is in support of human progress. So if Muslims came and Islamic invaders came and they destroyed a lot of temples, these temples had to be destroyed so that the people could be dragged out of the oppression, the Brahminical oppression that was getting created. Now, this Marxist historiography also played very well into the Islamist politics. So you have for the Christians also it was very good. From an evangelical perspective, it showed that Hinduism, despite all its political, all its philosophical grandeur, was deficient. And it was deficient either in its humanism or it was deficient in Christian theological name, grace. So in all these things, there was a convergence of interest, demonizing Indian culture. So this became, see, the educational institutions have been captured by at the head by the Marxists and at the institutional level by the church. Naturally, why should they be teaching us about our Vedas or Upanishads?
So these, these points of view, they're kind of filters. They project certain things onto Hinduism. They have blinders on so that they don't see certain aspects of Hinduism. Now, in your efforts to communicate through this morass, what are some of the things, maybe a few things that you really wish that these people would look at and acknowledge, because they keep missing it and focusing instead on their own points of view, their own modeling that monotheism is superior, that rituals are superstition. What is it that they're not seeing? And why wouldn't they see it? Is it a threat to them? Is this something existential for them? What kind of battle do they think they're in? The Christians on the one hand and the Marxists on the other.
See, what they do not understand is that, of course, they are afraid. They are afraid. Because the Hindu, if we are going to write a Hindu historiography, this is where I differ from many of my colleagues in the Hindutva circle also, is that our historiography is not going to be the historiography of, it is not going to be the histories of empires. It is going to be the history of the mendicants, the history of ascetics, the history of people who possessed nothing, who roamed the entire length and breadth of India half naked, and then they created big changes, big cultural, civilizational, spiritual changes. They brought spiritual awareness. This history writing is the natural history writing of India. Many people tell that India does not have a sense of history writing. Actually, we have a great sense of history writing. And this history is the real history because it takes into account the real civilizational processes that make this nation. And this civilizational process is also a process of consciousness unfolding. So this historiography is entirely different. And I would say that this is going to be the future way in which you are going to write the history of the world humanity, the history of the entire world, how you are going to write. It is about the experiences, deep experiences that the members of human species had at different points of history, and how these deep experiences, deep spiritual experiences that dissolved the small self and made them experience a kind of absolute unitary non-dual experience, how that changed the poles of civilization. That is the history that India has produced. It is there. I will give you two examples of this. One is, there is this compendium of great Bhakti saints called Sri Bhakta Mahavijayan. Okay. This Bhakta Mahavijayan is a very popular Bhakti literature that consists of the biographies of all the Bhakti saints. The medieval Bhakti saints from Sindh, from Maharashtra, from the Hindi heartland. They have all these Bhakti saints. There are potters, there are washermen, there are women, there are housewives, there are servant maids, all these people, how their experience changed the course of history for the people. Sri Bhakta Mahavijayam chronicles the whole thing. Okay, the same way you have similar Periya Puranam in South India of the Bhakti saints. So this history, the history of the saints, the history of the spiritual experiences that changed the course of civilization is more important to India than dynasties. You don't care about the kings who ruled. For example, now there is a lot of talk about the Chola dynasty. If you look at this particular phenomenon, it is very interesting. If you look at all our great emperors, before the Islamist invasions, you would have found that even after the Islamist invasions like that of the Vijayanagar Empire, you will find that they have always built big temples that are everlasting. But where are the palaces and the castles? Why they did not build any palaces and castles? The same way. Why they built only the temples? And if you look at the temples, it's very interesting. For example, there is this Hazara Rama temple in Vijayanagar, Hampi. If you go there, you will find that the first panel, the very first panel shows Dasaratha standing before Shravana, the name is Yajnadatta, and shivering. A prince, okay, a prince, a crown prince, not even a king. A king means responsibilities. A crown prince means a lot of less responsibilities and a lot of power. Fully armed, he was standing. He was shivering in front of two blind old people, a old woman and a old man. He was shivering with all the arms. That is how Indian history is written. It is not to tell that, see, again, I will tell you one particular dimension of historiography. They tell that kings built the Rama temples because they wanted to show that they had this divine authority to rule. No. When you build a Rama temple, you are celebrating a Rama who renounced the crown and went to the forest, whose father was actually shivering before this old couple. So it is Dharma, the insistence of Dharma, and telling the king again and again that you are subservient to Dharma and this Dharma is not religious doctrine. That is the basis of Indian historiography. If you are going to write an Indian history like that, that will be actually an example for the entire world to follow, how to write a real history of people in a holistic history. It will contain the history of art, history of philosophy, history of science, history of civilization, and history of the unfolding of consciousness at the human species level. No, if Marxists and Christians, if they understand this, they will actually benefit from it. They can remove the deficiencies of Christianity and Marxism and make them better if they Hinduize themselves. Unfortunately, they are afraid because this will destroy the power structures.
And India is virtually one of the last places where Marxism has any power at all. In many other places, it's collapsed. And even more than that, I saw that many people in India do not realize that in the West now, Christianity has very, very little institutional power. When I came to Canada as a 10-year-old back in 1973, at that time, there was Lord's Prayer every morning in school. But that was the last year. After that, new laws came in and secularism was in ascendancy, and that was no more done. And little by little, gradually, Sunday shopping, which used to be in place, went. And so any idea about asking the clergy or the church now for advice on, managing society, managing young people's lives after all these sex scandals and so on, the church is destroyed here. Yet in India, it seems to have, in some places, a kind of a vitality. Now, I wonder, we get that information outside of India through reports, through social media, sometimes that can be amplified. It doesn't really represent what's happening on the ground. Now, how big a problem is it in India that Hindus that Hindus would experience some kind of obstacle in carrying out their ritual festival activities and so on? Is there much of that going on that people worry about as they carry out these festivals? Or is it overblown in terms of what the reportage is?
With respect to the Hindu festivals getting intimidated by the church, it is very much true. There is underreporting, there are no exaggerations.
Okay.
Because in my place, as I said, there was a time when Hindus, to bathe their goddess in Hindu Mahasagar, in Hindustan, they have to get the permission of the local parish priest. When to go to the sea without disturbing the Christians, and how to go, what all the instruments they should use, what all the musical instruments they should use. And so this is the kind of power that the church has. You said that the church is in decline in the West, particularly in United States and all. The reality is that the center of gravity of the devout population has been shifted to Asia. Today in China and in India, there is a large number of Christians, more number of Christians than in, say, United States or any particular European country. And they are more devout, and they could be easily controlled by the church. I will give you a very horrible example to show the power that the church has over the families. Okay, compared to this, what the scandal that came out, the pedophile scandal that came out in the West is nothing. You see, this is all recorded, well recorded, and you can Google it. In Kannur, a small place in a small town and place in Kerala, a teenage girl got pregnant. She didn't even know that she was pregnant. And when it became a scandal, the father of the girl, he came and confessed that he was responsible for her pregnancy. Later, it was found that the father was not responsible. He was safeguarding a Catholic priest. Okay, this Catholic priest, he got the girl admitted in a Catholic hospital, where the girl was told that some appendicitis operation was happening and the child was removed. Then this child was admitted in a Catholic orphanage. You can see the amount of complicity, that is institutional complicity involved in this. And the kind of control that the church has over the parents, that the parent comes and tells such a heinous, unthinkable, inhuman crime to safeguard the church. This is the kind of power that the medieval church had. That is the kind of power the church today has in India. And it is also safeguarded by this so-called wrong minority rights and all those kind of things. They're in their own institutions. They have their own powers. And the West is also happy because this is a kind of a civilizational conquest. I would call this theo-colonialism. The people here are the theo-colonial subjects of the great theological empire, civilizational empire that the West has built. No? And this theological empire is even not their best theology, it is second-rate theology. With that, they are able to control this many number of Asians. So they are also very happy about it. Church is a civilizational flag bearer of the West, as far as they are concerned. It may be in decline in the West, but they are very happy that they have got foot soldiers and cannon fodder here in India and China and other countries in Asia. That is why.
And if you look at Korea, you can really see how powerful a force that can become, yes, where Buddhism is under a lot of stress there, isn't it?
Yeah, almost it has been wiped out. Almost it has been wiped out. So this is a big problem that we are having. The West knows it. And I am telling you again that the pedophile scandal that has to be exposed in India, when it is exposed, it is going to be 1,000 times worse than the scandal that the church faced in United States.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. Well, with all of that as the background, as kind of the situation on the ground, and textbooks are still reinforcing that by teaching AIT and so on. The BJP has been in power for a couple of terms now in India. Do you think they're doing enough with the textbooks, or is that at the right pace, or it doesn't so much matter anymore because the discussions have moved online? What's your estimation of how much could have been done and how much has been done?
See, in the case of textbooks, we have to, first of all, we have to remember that BJP is a political party. And it can take up a particular problem only when there is a massive support on the ground. In the case of take Ram Janmabhoomi, Sri Ram Janmabhoomi, from the Ayodhya movement, there has been a great support. There have been even greater sacrifices. And it is because of that that Modi government was able to build this great Ram Mandir. There has been a great movement like Yagata movement, Yagata Yatra movement for removing the Article 370 of Kashmir. So Modi government was able to do it. Whereas in the case of changing the textbooks, how many people's movement we have got at the ground? Unfortunately, there is no movement at the ground level. Unfortunately, I haven't seen even 25 parents coming to Jantar Mantar and launching an Andolan against the textbooks that are present. That is number one. Number two, all our opposition to the left had worked in the field of historiography. They have created a series of historical narratives. The Hindu side, we have been always reactive. We have produced excellent rebuttals to AIT. Still, it is only reactionary. We have produced excellent rebuttals exposing how the negationism against the medieval Islamist atrocities had happened. But still, it is only a reaction. What about the historiography? Fortunately, now we have historiography like Meenakshi Jain's excellent book on Hindu history, Hindus in Hindustan. For the first time, we are generating a history textbook. We need such history textbooks first to be generated by the scholars. From that, then we will be able to tell the government, take from this. Right now, Romila Thakur's History of Ancient India and Jawaharlal Nehru's Discovery of India, they provide the framework. We have to change it. We have not yet provided a framework. And if they are going to then change the textbooks, naturally, when the next government comes, it will change it back. If you take, for example, in the case of Rajasthan, you will remember when BJP government was there, it had books, it had lessons on Veer Savarkar. When the Congress government came, it removed that lesson. The result is that for a child who is learning, the child will think, okay, the Indian history is a football between two ideological camps. This is exactly what the left wants the child to believe, that India doesn't have a history. There are only ideological narratives. We have to change that. We have to create a strong meta-narrative that subsumes all the narratives these people have created and show their place. This is what Romila Thapar says. But is it true? Our textbook should have the capacity to ask that question and make the child think. So that kind of history textbook writing is beyond the power of government. It is with the entire intellectual body, the dharmic intellectuals who are right now coming up. They have to take up this task. We have to work. Now there are 8 years have gone. And today we have Meenakshi Jain's book, Hindus of Hindustan. We have Sai Deepak's books. And we have the books by Vikram Sampath. All these books have come. Now from this we have to create the history textbooks. We have to take and we have to create the history textbook. Then we should create a people's movement of parents and students who would demand the government that you change the history textbooks this way. Then it will happen. Otherwise,
my impression is that even from reading from even some of the teachers that are teaching this standard but affected politically motivated history in the schools, they're having to say things like, look, I have to teach you this because this is what the exam questions are going to be based upon and asking. But, there's a lot more information available now, especially online, that negates all of this. So are young people, how affected are young people because these are the textbooks, in this day and age?
See, again, here we are having another one problem. You see, a modern student, he is almost least bothered about history. It is another one big problem that we have. Okay, so if the teacher is going to take, the teacher is also not bothered, the student is also not bothered what is there in the textbooks, and all this anyway happened long back, so they don't have to worry about it. Okay, now the point is, this again helps the anti-Hindu forces. Indifference to Indian history that is generated by this kind of an alienated narrative, and it disinterests the teachers, it disinterests the students. So no teacher is going to tell you go and search in the online for this kind of aspect, unless otherwise the teacher has an orientation, a dharmic orientation. Now you cannot expect most of the teachers to have such orientation to go and tell the students. They will just tell, as you rightly said, you read for the marks. There are only two types of, two marks have actually destroyed Indian education system. One is Karl marks, another one is this test marks. Okay, and the point is now we have to make sure that the student thinks there is something useful in Indian civilization. And in that aspect, today there is a great interest in CAKs, these civilizational Indic knowledge systems. So this Indic knowledge systems, how vibrant you are able to create these Indic knowledge systems and make the student realize that the Indic knowledge systems are important. And then he will ask the question, what is the kind of historical civilizational processes that has generated these knowledge systems? So this Indic knowledge system courses, they are now coming up. In many universities, in IITs, they are coming up. We have to make sure that these are very effective, very pragmatic to the student, and then they will go and change the history textbook. It will take at least one generation for this to happen.
Now, what are some examples of Indic knowledge systems?
I will give you one very good example that we recently talked about when I was talking with, interacting with Sri Annamalai, Tamil Nadu BJP president, and he told about this very wonderful person called Swami Sahajananda. Swami Sahajananda was a Advaitic monk who was also a member of Legislative Assembly. Okay, and he said this particular very interesting thing, that in the school you have physical education if you in Indian system, every week you will have at least 2 to 3 periods physical education. You will have 2 to 3 periods moral education. He said in the same way, in every school, there should be a syllabus about the local herbs, the local plants, the local herbs, and what kind of first aid you can give with these local herbs. Okay. So he wanted to create a system like that. Now, if you are going to create a system like that, see the problems. You cannot have this syllabus created by somebody sitting in Madras or Delhi or Bombay. This syllabus has to be created by the local Vaidyas. You have to go to the local Vaidyas. You have to ask them what are all the herbs that you have, what are all the medicines that you are able to make, and then you will have to integrate that to that particular school textbooks. If you are in, let us say, Kanyakumari, then your textbook on this particular local herbs will be different from the textbook that you are having in Mumbai, the textbook you are having in Madras, the textbook you are having in Madurai. So amazing variety of textbooks will be created with the local knowledge systems. And the Vaidyas will be again getting respect. And this will generate interest in these medicinal forms, that if suppose the student becomes a biochemist, he will carry this knowledge with him and he will become a biochemist, a better biochemist, a pragmatic biochemist. Right? So this is one example of how the local knowledge system can be generated. Now look at the educational system. If I am very good in education, I will leave my village. After finishing my education, I will leave my village. If I am good in the town, after finishing my education, I will leave my town. If I am good in education in the, I will go to, say, a cosmopolitan city. If I am good in education there, I will leave the nation and I will go to foreign country. The local value has not been recognized by the educational system. India created something called Sthala Purana. Sthala Purana is the greatness of a particular temple in that particular village. And then it will tell that this particular temple is even greater than Kashi. The god himself came here and did this thing. And this is the Sthala Vriksha. This is the Tirtha. This is the water body associated with this temple. The point is, a student who learns Sthala Purana will have a great fondness for his village. When he studies, he will contribute to his village. That particular rootedness has been destroyed. If we are going to bring back these Indic civilizational knowledge systems in a very proper way, we will be able to create local ecological awareness, local bioheritage awareness, and also local theoheritage awareness. It's just one example.
Okay. You know, it's very ironic that in the West, Ayurveda and yoga are just being picked up by so many people. You know, these are two very powerful Indic knowledge systems. You mentioned Ayurveda in a very local context. So that same idea localized throughout the world. That's what's coming up. In India, a lot of people seem not to be aware of it or not appreciate it, relegate it to some kind of ancient, superstitious kind of folk belief type of use of plants. And, you know, with yoga, there's so much being picked up in the West. It's in early stages, but it seems to me that the West is moving towards these, in particular, these two powerful Indic knowledge systems. And only when it is popularized or accepted in the West, it kind of comes back to India, and the middle class begins to pick it up and talk about it for the first time. It's extremely ironic, and it's also very tragic, because the power of these systems is far beyond anything that the West has produced. And it's under the leading edge of people that are open to bettering things, to better ideas, that are the first ones to open into this. Now, with yoga, you know, that adds an entirely new epistemology, or an aspect to epistemology. Without that, the West exists without that, and it's mired in positivism. It's mired in materialism. Only in India do we have this view, which is generated from within India. It's India's own view of reality. And so it seems very much that we are in a civilizational battle between these two sorts of epistemologies. on the one hand, the Western epistemology, particularly now in the modern era, tied to science, is positivism, that if you can't measure it, if you can't show it to someone else, then it's meaningless to talk about it. It's just meaningless and it doesn't need to be responded to. But it misses out on a crucial plank of epistemology, which has this incredible growth in India for a millennia. And yet people in India are not appreciating it. It's very tragic. It's starting up now. And now your current book deals with that specifically. So I think that's been a very important contribution because it presents a view onto reality, not from a Western point of view and then projected onto India, but it shows how India appreciates reality from its own point of view. Now, was that something explicitly that you wanted to show in the book? Because that's a very strong idea that you're bringing out, that India has this way of looking at things that integrates, and I've seen you do this more than most, integrates these two grand notions of Dharma and science. We're sitting on something so powerful, so complete, and we're battling with things that don't have half the power, and yet they have institutional support. And they have this ecosystem to promote themselves.
See, this
and we're not getting there yet.
This is a very, very important question, epistemology. If you look at the West, if you look at the entire philosophical history of the West, perhaps during the pagan times, there were multiple epistemological windows available to them at that time, perhaps. We are not very sure about it. But what we know is that with the emergence of Christianity, the Aristotelian framework got wedded to Christian theology and it created a very concrete structure, a very concrete structure. And this concrete structure, which is also a power structure, allowed only one epistemological window through which you could view the reality. And this became again reinforced by the Newtonian view of the entire world, universe as a kind of machine. So reductionism helped. I won't say that this was completely useless. This was useful because you thought that God created the entire thing, and so this extra cosmic God has created everything with superb intelligence. And so if you look at each and everything, you will be able to decipher a particular mechanism, and then you will go and study that particular mechanism. And they called it even natural theology. And all these things were building up, and then came Darwinian evolution. Then came the new physics, the revolution of new physics, particularly with the double slit experiment, the way the observer and the observed, all those things got blurred. The distinctions got blurred. Consciousness became part and parcel of the vocabulary of physics. And then there were deeper questions about consciousness itself. All this came. And Albert Einstein rightly said that I feel like my foundation is moving away under my feet. And this foundation is this Aristotelian foundation that has been created. And where would they go? They are searching, right? And that is why you have this famous dialogue between David Bohm and J. Krishnamurti about ending of time and aspects. In India, what you see, what is so beautiful about the Indian system is that we have epistemological windows. Multiple windows. I call it epistemological pluralism. So you have a Vaiseshika window if you want to look at the atoms. You have the Sankhya window if you want to look at evolution. You have the Nyaya window if you want to go into the meaning of the words and things. And you have you have yoga, you have Vedanta, you have Mimamsa, and also you have, along with all this Prajita Samudbhava of Buddhism, you have the Saptabhangi of Jainism. All these windows are available to you. So I want to study a particular science phenomenon, a physical phenomenon. I want to study a flower. I can choose one of these windows and I can enter and study the flower. If a scientific discovery has been made, let us say about oscillating universe, I can use one of these epistemological windows and I can experience that particular discovery. So either way, to approach a problem as well as to experience science, the third culture of Sipisnu, both, India has a great civilizational advantage with respect to this epistemological pluralism. The problem, the real hurting problem is that we have not used it. We should have used it. The West needs, by West I mean the modern science needs an epistemological pluralist system to support it. We have it, we are not giving it. Why we are not giving it? Because we have not, as you rightly said, we have not institutionally prepared ourselves to give it. Whereas in the West already efforts are being made to take this and integrate with their civilization. Like in the case of that famous Nisargadatta Maharaj group, disciples group that is doing this, what is it called? Science and non-duality, SAND. You can see it in YouTube, Science and non-duality. They are doing it. We do not have such a thing. We do not have such a thing. Why? Because we are not coming together and we are not creating. And that is why this, the Sutra magazine, that movement that you started is a very important movement. A very important movement. The dialogue that we need to have with science, the modern science, and to use our epistemological tools to understand it and take it to the people. I will give you one solid example for this. You had George Sudarshan, remember, George Sudarshan, the great physicist. He was asked about how he got into this and what is the way in which you can actually do science. And he said that he quoted Vishnu Sahasranama. The very first name of Vishnu in Vishnu Sahasranama is Viswam. Viswam is the universe. The entire universe is Vishnu. So when I do physics, it is sadhana. When I discover something, it is a non-dual experience that I'm having, an Advaitic experience that I'm having. This is the psychology of scientific discovery. The psychology of scientific discovery has yogic roots. It has the capacity for self-transcendence. And we only talked of the political in India. I am coming back. In India, we only talked of this political slogan called scientific temper. We never entered into the psychology of scientific discovery, which is rooted in yogic psychology. You had such great people like Ramsuru. You had great savants, but unfortunately, we didn't use them properly. That is again, we are coming to the institutional tragedy of India. Today, we are trying to rectify it. We have to rectify it.
Well, we have so much, as you said, leading people in modern science itself have been looking at that for a long time. Now, I remember during what you were saying, the central notion being epistemological pluralism, that you have these windows through which to appreciate reality. So opposing this idea of epistemological pluralism has been this idea that there is one description, one objective description of reality, and that somehow we can find it using reason, measurement, and basically positivistic attitude, which has no room for yogic epistemology. Now, Niels Bohr, the great physicist, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, he said the word phenomena should be taken to mean both the object under study and the mode of observation. He said that was the lesson, or one of the chief epistemological lesson of quantum mechanics that the West was learning was about epistemological pluralism, that this idea of phenomena as something just sitting there as an object to consciousness, separate from consciousness. So this dualistic model is what's forwarded, where there is consciousness and there is everything else that consciousness is looking at. So we have reality arbitrarily divided into two sections. We somehow land ourselves in a position of saying that reality is all there is, but somehow I want to be able to get outside all there is and describe it as a pure object. And a pure object has characteristics like, when was it created? How long does it last? When was it no more? When did it die? When was it destroyed? So there's this whole, dependently arisen chain of factors, space, time, all these things that had been thought to be objective for such a long time. Newton's absolute space, Newton's absolute time, Newton's solid, uncuttable atoms. All of that Einstein saw through. There is no absolute space. There is no single universal clock ticking away, timing everything. There is no absolute time. There's no absolute space. The universe is not like some gigantic room that everything exists in. So we're caught up in these concepts that are objectifications of something that can't be objectified. You can't get outside of reality and describe it as an object. The thing is, the whole idea is off, is actually absurd. It's crazy making. It's the attempting of something impossible, not realizing one is attempting something impossible and driving oneself crazy, continuing to go for something, trying to find something that's impossible. And here comes quantum mechanics, and Niels Bohr says that this notion of one epistemology, one objective reality isn't how things are. That we have to even change what we mean by the word phenomena. The word phenomena should be taken to mean, he said, both the object under study and the mode of observation. And that's where India has been for the longest time, to acknowledge and respect this epistemological pluralism, and particularly with yogic epistemology being something that would be the new aspect that the modern world would take on. So if we can come to a place and realize that reality as oneness, reality as a whole, well, there's no getting outside of that. The quest of an objective description of reality that science, through its positivistic means, goes after is actually an impossibility. As you mentioned earlier, it's the Aristotelian foundation that Einstein felt crumbling under his feet. Well, I mean, he brought out the experimental thought experiments, and then experiments later to solidify that, to prove those notions. That's what caused that foundation to be shaking. And all these people, including Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, David Bohm, you mentioned, even Einstein in his conversations with Tagore, they begin to see it in India, that here's finally a solution Niels Bohr specifically ends up saying that uh, people like Buddha and Lao Tse and in the Upanishads, these problems that we're dealing with now have been looked at and dealt with. That's why I read those books. So that if we, so the leading edge in science in the West has gotten to where India has been for a long time, the need for epistemological pluralism, and the problem becomes very sharply defined. If what we have been wanting is understanding and appreciation of reality that's true to how things are, and we have now seen that we cannot get outside of reality, that's an impossibility, that's absurd. There's going to be no one objective reality because reality does not exist as an object to anyone. For everyone, reality is something that they are part of. The only way to experience reality is from within reality. And in India, two goals have been identified. One is the experience of being a part within the whole. And secondly, the experience of the whole as the whole. Now, the first one is ordinary, the experience of being a part within the whole. We experience that all the time, being one among many all the time. And in that context, when we want to understand reality, we have to choose epistemological windows. We have to get different epistemological approaches. And the one approach that is yet to be really appreciated, and that's what is so strong in India, is the yogic epistemological approach towards the whole. So the inhabiting of the whole. And we have very clear statements, starting from the Rig Veda, and Patanjali in particular tells us that it's the fluctuations in the mind, the thought forms, the concepts, like absolute space, absolute time, things that bind us into a erroneous picture of our existential position. Our existential position is possible to approach, but it has to be approached through yoga. It has to be approached through an avenue which inhabits wholeness, is the experience of wholeness to itself. And we have terms for that, Satchitananda. There's so much literature that we're sitting on something that is complete, that we don't need to build more research institutes, though we can, because there's going to be applications as well. So we are now face to face, what India has always had and where the West is looking at now. And some people at the leading edge of that are in a very exciting place, looking at these developments. And in India, we have this framework of non-duality, which is not much in evidence in the West. Modern West, certainly. In the Christian West, it was always under some kind of danger if it were to become exposed or talked about too much. As you mentioned earlier, prior to that, perhaps Indo-European world may have had that which was shorn down, cut down by Christianity, and then the other factors of modernity, postmodernism, Marxism have pummeled that even more, so that the last place left in this world that has any potential of overcoming this really limiting epistemology, which prevents something which is crucial, It prevents self-knowledge. It prevents the one thing that motivates everyone, which is the curiosity about knowing what one is, what is this a world, where it comes from. I mean, science tries dealing with that as well, but because of the limited epistemology, it's coming under dead ends, coming at dead ends, and yet here is all of this sitting here in India. And you wrote a lot about that in your recent book, particularly showing how it's something that's embedded in the Indian civilization. And that's very difficult. I find, I mean, we're in early phases, but it's potentially a very difficult thing to communicate, don't you think?
Actually, yeah. The interesting thing about Indian civilization is that they have embedded this very deep, very difficult to understand aspects of reality, deeper reality, into the everyday life of Indian children, Indian families. For example, most of the families you have Lalita Sahasranama chanting, right? So in Lalita Sahasranama, you have this wonderful thing. It says, Dhyana Dhyaktu Deya Rupa, Dharma Dharma Vivarchita. So Dhyana Dhyaktu Deya Rupa. The object of meditation, the process of meditation, the meditator, they are all merged in the consciousness of the day. Dhyana Dhyaktu Deya Rupa, Dharma Dharma Vivarchita. Viswarupa Jagarani Swapanti Daijasatmika Shupta Prajnatmika Durya Sarva Vasta Vivarchita. These names actually are the essence of Mandukya Upanishad. So you have this Jagrata consciousness, dimension of consciousness, where you have Vaisvanara, where the consciousness is universal. For example, you have this knowledge called the area of the circle. You take area of the circle, pi r square. Pi r square is the knowledge that you get in Jagrata, and that knowledge is universal. It is Vaisvanara knowledge. Whereas you have the intuitive knowledge that comes in the form of dreams. For example, when Kekule was thinking about the structure of benzene, he got it through the dream of the snake catching its own tail. And that is the knowledge that comes from the Swapna dimension of the consciousness. Then you have the condensed state of consciousness. Just now, as we are talking, a paper has been published that talks about how the sleep actually is also a state of consciousness in which the brain fluid very physically removes all the different problems, contaminations that you have, everything, and soothes you. And then you have Turiya, which is a deeper state, and Turiya Adhita, and all these 5 dimensions of consciousness are talked about in Lalita Sahasranama, and then everybody chants Lalita Sahasranama. Whether it is your house helper, or whether it is a quantum physicist, or whether it is a small child who wants some marks in her next examination, they all chant Lalita Sahasranama. And Lalita Sahasranama in it, which is a stotra, also contains this embodied knowledge. If you are going to become a cosmologist, if you are going to become a linguist, then this knowledge will help. It will flower in you. So this aspect, that the toughest thing of self-knowledge, where the deep physics, deep psychology, meditation, everything unite, it has the capacity to understand that has been codified in different hymns, in different rituals, and it has been given to an entire civilization. So they can take it for granted. That is kind of a great achievement. In the very human civilization, this is a great achievement. And we are taking it for granted. No? When I am singing a song to a god or a goddess, it may contain the highest truth. And I am just doing it out of my devotion. See, this civilizational aspect has to be upgraded, and it has to be protected and nourished.
Absolutely. You are very deeply involved and embedded in this for a long time. And we're having a conversation, and I've been thinking about these things for a long time as well. And the richness, the completeness of the approach, I mean, it is just so beautiful. It is just so grand that it's a real shame that it isn't easily available to everyone. And otherwise, we are caught in these deficient models, these deficient worldviews, uh, in which we ourselves exist. But these worlds that we have imagined, in which we exist as we imagine. I mean, it's also uh, well defined. The concepts are there. The context is there. You mentioned, uh, two things that really caught my eye just now. One of them was this whole notion that for a Hindu approach to cosmology, is something that should be built.
Yes. Yeah.
So that right now, when we think, cosmology, we think of Carl Sagan and the famous scientists in the Roger Penrose and so on, and Stephen Hawking. But once again, this is a very limited approach of trying to find one objective description. And whereas the Indian approach to cosmology has yoga, has this right away, this understanding of the need for epistemological pluralism because of how things are, because reality can never be construed as a pure object. So you cannot use that avenue to come to the end of knowledge, to come to the end of the process of knowing something that you would like to know. I mean, if it were indeed an object, then you would come to an end of knowledge about it. It was created at a certain time. It had this history, and then there was its demise, like the history of the body can be dealt with that way. But when we begin to think about, well, what about mind? What about consciousness? Does it have an origin? Does it have an end? Well, in India, we certainly say that it doesn't conform to those parameters, that the time and space themselves are not absolutes. Well, something that modern scientists finally come to. And we have in India people then working in this way of approaching cosmological questions, this Indian approach to cosmology, which recognizes the need for yogic epistemology to come to the experiential knowledge of reality in the non-dual context. We have that extremely well defined. The second thing you mentioned that really caught my eye was that over thousands of years, from such a clear starting point, such a clear epistemological starting point, that we have had thousands of years of having the opportunity to build application forms, platforms for application, whether that's in medicine, whether that's in the arts, whether that's in psychology, even architecture. So it's the vision of given to us by the rishis of old, that if you see something very deeply and in a true way, it doesn't need to change. So when Ayurveda says that the properties of fennel seeds are that it cuts bowel gas, well, that's never going to change. That's something that's once understood, once categorized, always going to be useful. That's a trivial example compared to the starting point being so solid at the level of epistemology, that we want to know what reality is, what self is, what world is, the relationship between the two. And if we start off thinking that we can treat reality as an object that can be described from a distance, we're never going to get beyond creating different kinds of models. We're never going to actually have a picture view of reality as it exists in a pristine way, because that whole thing is absurd, but bought into and very difficult. You know, the idea of naive theism, and I read you're writing about that yourself, that the two things that need to be overcome, you said one was naive theism, which is what one might think Hinduism is when you first come across the Devatas and the gods and goddesses translation of it, especially. And then the other is naive realism, which quantum mechanics and modern science kind of breaks us out of. So we have these planks of platforms, and only in India does it start off in an exacting and accurate way. And to point this out, sometimes one can get called a Hindu chauvinist because it's not being admitted that all views have something about them and so on and so on. Well, you know, but some things are very fundamental. And epistemology is one such thing. If you don't appreciate how you're going to come reality, what the nature of that is, that process is, and if you get stuck on one or another idea, it's very difficult to come out of it. In India, we're sitting here. It seems to me that we're at a period of time in history where we're watching these ideas kind of move from India to the modern West. Compared to 30, 40 years ago, there's been a lot of change in all of that. Now, I wonder how you see this unfolding. Do you find optimism in that, or not so much, or how do you see things unfolding from here?
Right now, it is the Schrodinger's cat. Right? It is the Schrodinger's cat.
Could be either.
It is because, see, this particular period in time is very important for Hindus. This is a window of opportunity for Hindus to reassert themselves. If Hindus as a nation, they reassert themselves, then only the yogic psychology or the yogic epistemology or the epistemological pluralism, they all can be given to the entire humanity as a civilizational gift from India. If it doesn't happen, then definitely if Hindus are to disappear tomorrow, let us say, if Hindus are to disappear tomorrow, the world will arrive at epistemological pluralism at a particular point of time. I will give you the example of Hypatia. It is said that Hypatia discovered the elliptical nature of the orbits. And then Hypatia and the entire Alexandria temple was destroyed. The library was destroyed. The humanity had to wait for almost 1,000 years to again come to the point of discovering the elliptical orbits. In the same way, epistemological pluralism, yogic psychology, yogic epistemology, all these things, if we preserve ourselves, then we can give it to the humanity as a gift. If we do not, if we leave out this particular window, which is very much a political, economic, nation-state-based window, if we miss out this window, then Hindus would be destroyed and the humanity would have to wait for another 1,000 years to rediscover the whole thing. So we have to make sure that we use this particular window, and it is closing. It is closing. We have to make sure that we have to use this window very clearly, very cleverly, and in a very intelligent way, not for ourselves, but because Hindus are a blessing to the entire humanity. So we have to use it.
Couldn't agree more. I have one more question for you, and the question is more about your own evolution as a Hindu, coming to greater and greater awareness of what Hinduism is, what it contains. Now, for example, very briefly for me, it was, I didn't know anything about it because I had moved out of India at a very young age, and I was studying in university, and it was 30, 40 years ago, especially at a time when reductionism was at its peak. So I was being taught a very reductionistic, very materialistic view onto everything, and I had trouble with that. I couldn't really buy it. It wasn't making enough sense to me at a fundamental level, and yet I didn't have any alternative to it. That is to say, I didn't have any alternative to it until I began to read books on Indian philosophy. And I would read these books, come across some of these grand ideas, especially to do with epistemology. And I would think, now this makes sense. Why was I not taught this in university? University is supposed to be the highest level of education in the modern world. And yet, I might be able to find something about this in a specialized course in, philosophy of a particular branch, not very prominent at all, as a specialized course, perhaps. But little by little, after reading that in my adult years, in my 20s, I saw how much was there, and I was flabbergasted that it was just there, and it was more or less luck that I actually got to it. It wasn't around being taught. Now I'm wanting to know, for you, what was the process of you coming to these perhaps deeper realizations, or perhaps it was one big thing one time when you saw how much was there, and it's like it kind of blew your mind that, you mentioned early on when you were young, the approach was more bhakti oriented, which is very fitting. And then you saw later on in some of the shlokas this incredibly deep philosophy, this deep knowledge base. So please say something about that process growing up where you began to realize that Hinduism is dealing with some of the deepest issues beautifully. And you're having to how did you come across that yourself?
Right. See, as I said, the atmosphere around me, once I step out of my house, the atmosphere around me was hostile for a long time when I was a small child. Hostile in the sense, if you don't show your Hindu identity, you are fine. But if you show your Hindu identity, you will be having really traumatic experiences. Really traumatic experiences. That is how it was. Okay. And at the same time, I was fortunate to have both my parents. My mother was an atheist who moved to Hinduism through Mahatma Gandhi. And my father was a socialist who moved to Hinduism through Swami Vivekananda. Okay. And so they could give me that very clearly, they could show, and they were also very much associated with all the Hindu activities that were going on in the district. Vivekananda Kendra and other Sangh organizations, they were very much associated with the activities. At the same time, they had a very cordial relationship with all the people of all communities, all the faiths. Even during the communal riots, they didn't show any hatred. So I saw all these aspects of Hindu Dharma. And as you rightly said, bhakti is part and parcel of the home atmosphere. You always had songs recited. You had to remember, you had to memorize these long bhakti hymns that were sung by Alvars and Nayanmars, and you have to recite them every day. So this is the kind of atmosphere in which you grow. All the important ingredients have been put into the substratum of your mind. How it is going to grow, it is up to you. So they have this system in which everything was given to you. And then you can become an atheist, you can become a Hindu, you can become whatever you want, but these things will be put into you. And they will be waiting there for the appropriate time to germinate. This is the Hindu system of pedagogy that you have actually. Unfortunately, we are losing it out. And also I had my father was bibliophile, so he had all the books. And we had this Amar Chitra Kada, which gave the entire history, the complete history of India to me. So I never had this misfortune of depending only on the textbooks. I know very clearly that the textbooks are not telling the complete story. I have my Amar Chitra Kada, which told me clearly what it is. And then the Sangashaga and other things. All these molded you. And then comes a particular point when you lose your faith, like I read Darwin and I thought, okay, everything you can explain through evolution. And hence, I used to look upon everything as a part of, particularly if you read Desmond Morris, then you will think that every action of the human being every gesture of the human being can be explained by Darwinian evolution. So I was kind of, okay, I can explain even religion through evolution. Then I read Sri Aurobindo and I found that even here we have contributed a lot. There's a lot to understand. And so I understood one thing. For a Hindu, the journey is always getting all kind of knowledge, allow all the knowledge to come inside you. And already you have in your mind this beautiful, fragrant trees growing that have been put into you when you were a child. And they have been growing, and all this new knowledge, they came like birds and they could accommodate themselves in the branches of these huge trees that are inside you, these age-old civilizational trees that have been planted inside you. So that has been my journey. And then at a particular point of time, I thought, okay, my parents have given it to me, we have to give it back to the society. And I had also a guru, Swami Madhurananda Maharaj, and he was instrumental in creating these religious classes every Sunday. In our district again, you can see all the children taking this Bible and going to Bible class every Sunday. Every Christian child would have a basic understanding of Bible, whereas a Hindu child never bothered. And then a particular point of time came when the Hindu children wanted to know, the Hindu parents wanted their children to know, and Swami Madhurananda Maharaj, he created these classes, religious classes. Every Sunday we would go and we would learn basic Hindu history, basic Hindu philosophy, then some songs, then some slogas, and we would come back. And all this, I should say that it is purely my karma that I have been put into this particular environment, and it has shaped me. And I can very well assure you that there is no intelligence of mine involved in this. It is purely my punya karma, my parents' punya karma that has put me in this, and I have become this, what I am.
Thank you so much. I've always wanted to know about that, because you put so many things together, and I get a bit of a clear idea about that process, given your mother's atheistic orientation and your father's orientation pulled in a certain direction by Swami Vivekananda. You mentioned Sri Aurobindo, very powerful and important. You mentioned Sri Ram Swarup earlier as well, a very powerful contribution as well.
Extraordinary.
So I'm taking away from this conversation today one very important thing, which is that I'm going to think more about this idea of Indian or Hindu cosmology. How, well, I mean, what is the Hindu approach to cosmology? So far, I've kind of thought about it in terms of describing it in different ways, but this has brought the issue deeper for me, which is a wonderful thing. I feel really such a positive benefit from this conversation with you that I'm going away thinking about, well, what would be the Hindu approach to cosmology? I mean, there's like the Western approach, scientific approach to cosmology, and we spoke a little bit about the history of that and why it is the way it is, and we spoke about why the Hindu approach also is how it is and why it is. So that's very powerful. The idea of epistemological pluralism and how that's really powerful. Once you have that pluralism, then so many problems disappear at the social level as well, where you don't have these groups pitted against each other because they're isolated in one epistemological window only. So many issues can be solved. And I want to thank you for this conversation. I have one last little quick question for you. What are you working on now? You just released a book. You're on a tour to do that book. You're engaged in all sorts of discussions. Are there certain projects that you're working on right now, certain ideas that you're thinking about? What can we expect from you next in the future?
Actually, I am right now working on a book. I am finishing it. In 3 or 4 days, I will be finishing it. It is on the Dharmic social emancipation. How in India the social history should be written. How actually the social history happened in India. As I said, these mendicants, these ordinary sannyasins and bhakts who had the spiritual experience, they naturally transformed the society around them. It is like the fragrance of a flower. It transformed the society around them. And that aspect has not been studied. Instead, what has happened is that with the modern historiography, you look at the saints as kind of rebels or social reformers. They are not rebels. They are not social reformers. They are just beings who had this wonderful experience, and that experience naturally emancipated the people and transformed the people around, the society around them. And how this has happened through the ages, and how this has prevented bloodsheds, how it has minimized human misery, how it has liberated humanity. That is the one project that I am working on. Then I am also working on a book on empathy, particularly how the epistemological tools of science have become sharp with the empathy, and it has actually enlarged the canvas, that now we are understanding that animals have self-awareness, animals have consciousness, and the science is now understanding that. And why science is understanding that is mainly because its empathy has increased. So when your empathy becomes enlarged, your science canvas also gets enlarged. Before that, for example, you always wanted to say that the humans were very unique. The Neanderthals didn't have the human capacity. The chimpanzees didn't have the human capacity. The monkeys didn't have the human capacity. The humans are somehow unique. Today, science is blurring all those borders that have been created. And it actually validates Vedanta. It validates the yogic epistemology, in which the yoga allows you to have empathy with all beings. So that is another one project I'm working on. That said, I have to give my gratitude and my salutations to you, because that Sutra project the Sutra Journal project that you launched, it brought together beautiful minds. I remembered meeting Kathleen there, Mary Hicks there, and Dr. Jeff Long, Northern Hertz, people from diverse spiritual traditions, and you were able to bring them all together in this beautiful project that created something wonderful. I wish you will again do it. You will relaunch it. I want you to relaunch it. That is number one. Number two, I really enjoy those covers that you put, in nature, how the things will change and how nature will come out with this particular cover with the yogic epistemology, how they will deal science. We used to put these beautiful covers, the futuristic covers in the group, in the Sutra Journal group. That also I really love. And thank you so much for this conversation, this opportunity that you have given. Thank you.